Hello, hello.
Hello, hello. Welcome to the podcast.
Welcome back. Today, you guys love this UK-US stuff. It is so funny. It's usually some of our most popular listens.
Or why we don't celebrate Valentine's Day.
Well, yes, that was a very popular podcast as well. But so we have sourced from you guys what you want to know about living in the UK, particularly about living in London. And this was a question that people asked us a lot, especially a while back ago, like just over a year ago when we were looking for a place to live. Most of you who are in the United States, unless you're in a major city, could not understand how we couldn't find a place to live and how how we got outbidded. Most importantly, didn't understand this part. How we got outbidded.
Is that a word? Bidded? Is
outbidded? I'm making
outbid.
Outbid. When we were looking for a flat, when we're renting, we're not buying. That would be very expensive in London. And so we thought we'd explain that. Like, what is the difference between renting in the UK and the US?
I mean, what was the process? What did we learn? That kind of thing.
Exactly. Yeah. I should say I did do some research and have come to find out that in some major cities in the US, it is typical, like what we're going to describe. So New York City has some of the same processes, not everywhere. San Francisco, some places in LA. There were a couple other places sprinkled here in Boston, I think. However, even in those places, what we're going to talk about is not very typical, except for it has been, in certain seasons, if there's like a high demand for rentals, which there normally is in a big city. There's a high demand for rentals. So we rent, and we have rented. We've lived in 3 different places, if that tells you anything. That
within like...
in 6 years? No, 5 years. It was 5 years.
I don't know what, like probably within a mile radius?
Of each other.
Less than that, probably. Probably a half a mile radius.
I don't know. I think the last one might have been a mile, but yeah. So those things have happened because when you rent in a big city, our first landlord sold our house, sold the what we were living in. Our second one, we don't know why they wanted us out. We hadn't done anything wrong. They just asked us to leave. We thought they were selling it. I think what they did was knew they could get somebody to pay a lot more in rent, and so they asked us to leave. And now we're here. All that to say, we thought we'd explain what the process is because so many people have been very curious. And this might be helpful for those of you that are looking to move to the UK, because we know a couple of you that are doing that, or if you are someone who's just new to us and are listening to this because you want to understand it.
Okay, so I think we probably should
start from
the beginning. We've rented in the US.
Yes, we have rented in the US.
We've rented in the US.
And we've owned a house in the US.
And we've owned a house in the US. So our first experience when we first got married is we lived in an apartment.
Yes,
for
you were
2
living
years.
in an apartment.
I was living for before we got married.
I think we lived in the apartment for 2 years.
And then I think we lived in the apartment for 2 years.
And we both rented in university and stuff too.
And so obviously that process was pretty simple. You kind of looked around the areas that you wanted to potentially live in. For us at that time, we were looking at complexes. We didn't necessarily look at like individual houses or anything like that to rent. And then for the most part, at least from what I experienced initially, and then when we got married, it was like certain units were this much money.
2-bedroom is this much.
2 bedrooms this one. Yeah. And so that was kind of our experience, right? Is like there's a set fee, there's a set amount of months that you live there, all that kind of stuff where you sign on the dotted line, and that's how it goes.
I mean, you still had to have like a credit check.
Yeah, you still had like those kind of general things. But for the most part, in general, there are this unit, this type of unit, this is how much it is, and there's no wiggle room. It's just this is how much it is kind of thing.
Yes.
And so, yeah, we did that for 2 years. Again, like Maya said, we did that a little bit in university as well. And so coming here, it was such a unique experience.
And our experience at first was that we never saw our first house in person.
Yeah.
We had people who were helping us settle here look and rent a house because that's how it needed to be with the way the timings were. We couldn't make it over here to see it. And that happens a lot here in London too. Probably happens a lot in major cities as well. And so the process here is different in the fact that we'll leave that one aside because that was a little bit different because we hadn't seen it in person. But our other 2 houses we saw in person. Basically, you can go on to all these different websites, just like you probably can in anywhere, and see all these houses for rent. And they sometimes just post those because they've already put them up they already have been taken, which is really annoying. But you go on and you contact, all these houses are put up by different leasing agencies, or we call them estate agents here. And it can be confusing because the same house can be listed by 4 or 5 different estate agents, and sometimes at different prices depending on the estate agent. So it can be utterly confusing when you're looking and you call. And so you call. In general, normally you get a phone call back, but in the market like it has been since COVID times, you have to be the one that keeps pursuing them over and over and over, and be very frequent if you're not getting a phone call back about a property that you want to see. Normally when you call, they will actually kind of pre-interview you before they'll even show you the property. So they'll ask you about, like, you know, what size, what things do you want in a rental, you know, like what are your must-haves. They'll ask you about how many people are going to be living there, if you have pets. Often the question, this doesn't affect us, we don't have a car, do you need a parking spot? Because some places come with a parking spot, some you have to pay for paid parking, metered parking. So there's all kinds of questions like that. And then also, what do you do for a job? And then how much do you make? They're just, it's really, in the UK, I will say in general, you normally do not talk about that stuff, but boy, it is right up front when it comes to the rental stuff. You eventually have to prove that. And so they'll ask those questions. And then if they think, you don't get to be the judge of this, they do. If they think you're a good fit for the property. Now, of course, there would be some things, I think, if, you know, they don't allow pets and you have a pet, which I think that's changed too. I think they can't do that anymore. I think they have to allow pets, but then that would be, obviously, they're not going to show you that. So all that to say, then you would actually get to what is called a viewing, and you would get to go see the property. When I looked at our second house, like, I was here for a week. We were like in between visas and stuff like that. And I looked at 11 properties, I think,
in a couple days.
And so I was literally, that's all I did. I was packing up our house to move, and I was also on the phone and then just going to see property after property after property. The hard thing is, this often happens, I know, in the States too. They will use outdated photographs that have been taken sometimes 10 years ago, like right when they did a refurbish of the place, and then you go and see it and you're like, what?
Yeah, that doesn't look...
This isn't even the same place.
Yeah, is this the same
they're supposed to say on there if those photos are outdated, but not everyone does.
Yeah.
So you get to go to the viewing.
Yeah,
What's
I mean, that's a little bit...
How would you explain that?
I would say it's a lot like going to view a house if you're looking to buy a house in the States.
I would have looked at an apartment as well. We did.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's true as well. Yeah, I mean, basically, well, the most recent experience, a lot of times, is you show up, the estate agent or the agency that is in charge of the property will have a representative there, and then a lot of times you have maybe 10 minutes to go through and look at the flat and have any questions from that. And so... because the demand is so high, or at least it was so high, that after the 10 minutes, there was somebody else coming through. And like, it was just, it's insane. You just walk around, look at things and check things out as best you can.
And I will say the last time around that we did this, and so that would have been in 2021, there was a couple flats and houses that we showed up to, and there was a queue outside of people waiting to go in. So I think there was 10 people waiting the one time that we showed up.
Yeah.
Because when their times were and stuff like that. And so
then it's like also really intimidating when you walk out after your viewing and you see that queue is still really, really long, and you're like, ooh, this is going to be fun. It was
very weird. So you do that and you have that quick viewing, and sometimes they always say, there's a high demand on this property, whether that's true or not. Yeah. Now, recently that has been true because there's a high property, on every single one. And so they'll pressure you of like, would you like to make an offer? And sometimes they're wanting you to do it right then and there. Normally you have to like type up an offer and that kind of thing. But like in that scenario, there were several people that were like, oh, well, if you want to make an offer, you need to text me within the next 10 minutes. So you don't have very much time to think through things. You don't have very much time to think. There was one house I think we looked at that
especially if you like are seeing more houses later that day or the next, later that week or whatever, they pressure you really quick.
Yeah, and you don't even have time. There was one house, I think, a couple houses we looked at that we were like, can the boys still share a room in that? Can we put 2 beds in there? Can we put a bunk bed in there? And like, we just wanted to come home and look at the floor plan really quick, and like, you didn't have time to even do that. And so it's very, it's stressful. There's no other way. It's not kind of like, oh, it's fun to look at different places that are available. It's stressful. And I don't want to say this because we know our estate agent we have right now is lovely and wonderful, but there are a lot of estate agents that I think they're probably trained that way to just be really pushy with it. And
they're trying to move things fast.
And they make a commission.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, they're making a living too off of it, so I get that. So then is the offer stage. And so again, like I said, this is not very common in the suburbs or smaller cities of the United States. This is very common in like New York City or something like that. And what an offer means is it would be very much like it would be if you were purchasing a house in the United States. And so you would say they may have the rent price listed at a certain place, but that does not mean that you have to pay that amount. You could go below it, which doesn't happen right now, or you can go over it. For our first house, I think we went slightly below. Our second house, we were right on what they asked. This one, we were right on what they asked. But that was not the case while we were looking at things in 2021.
No.
So first in the offer is the price. And so there was one house we really liked. That was the one that had the queue outside. I mean, it wasn't like...
It wasn't like super special or anything.
It was just a nice place.
It was a nice house.
Simple, nice, that kind of thing. And so we made an offer. We went in right at asking price of what it was. And then we were told there was 15 offers. And they accepted one that was £1,000 per month over what the rent was listed as.
Which that's like $1,200 a month.
Yeah.
Roughly at this time, roughly around that.
Yeah, exactly. $1,200 to $1,300 a month extra. And we're like, well,
that's extra. That's
extra.
Not the
that was on top of the
price.
asking price. And like, we personally don't have wiggle room in our budget to do £1,000 more. That's $12,000 in a year in pounds. And so that kept happening. In the past, when we've looked at houses, landlords have wanted families. After COVID, they didn't want families as much, which is really interesting. I think maybe it's because people were in lockdown. I don't know if people tended to damage the house more because their kids were home more. I don't understand the reasoning.
I think my guess too would be a little bit of like, there were a lot of families that left central London just because they felt like they could, if they didn't have to be in work in the central London for work every day, maybe once every other week or whatever their company decided, that there was no reason for them to be actually living in some of the central zones here in London. And so I think a lot of times probably landlords were like, well, I don't really know how long these people are potentially going to rent with me anyway, so I don't know if this is the best solution. Is it better to have a student house where I know they're going to be there for a certain amount of years or whatever, or young professionals? So. And
what we did find out is a lot of the people who said they wanted a family ended up having young professionals who are just roommates, housemates and stuff that live together. And they can always offer more usually because it's for one person to be, they can split that cost, So if they split the £1,000 between four of them or whatever, however many rooms there are,
it's not as bad.
It's not as bad as for a family to have that. We looked at another house that we really didn't love, frankly, but we were like, we need a place. We were at that point. And so we made an offer. They told us when we were there, we actually met the landlord, which is kind of rare. And he was like, we're looking for a family. We're not looking to make money. Like, that's not what we're in this for, that kind of thing. We thought, oh, okay, well, like, we can get this house then. I think we did come in a little bit over what the asking price was. And then they came back to us and said, could you go over any more? Because we had somebody come in £900 over per month. And we're like, I thought you weren't in this for the money. Yeah. And I get it. I mean, if you have that coming at you, if we own someplace, we might be the same way. But that was really frustrating.
Yeah. And maybe sometimes too, like, really was that offer actually put in? You don't.
Well, that's the other thing.
You don't know either too. So it's just really hard. I think the biggest thing is if you know your budget and understand your budget here, you have to stick with it as best you can.
But it can be really hard to do that. Very difficult to do that. And so that was us. We had a budget and we're like, we have no wiggle room here. So that's the first part of the offer is the price that you can change it around for renting. This is not for purchasing a house. and then the time of the contract. So it could be for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. A lot of landlords like to have a longer contract if you can do that, because then they don't have to mess with, it's a lot of cost to them, I think, too, to have people moving in and out and that kind of thing. Paperwork, that kind of stuff. And so if you do a longer contract, sometimes they're more willing to sign the dotted line with you. And then there could be other things that are part of it as well. So for 2 of our houses, for our first house, for all 3 of our houses, that we've lived in here, houses and flats, there's been furniture in the house already. And like, we just happen to have our own furniture. Not everyone does.
Not everyone.
So that works for some people. And so that may be something you put in the contract to say, we'd like the furniture removed because we don't need it, or we want to keep these things, and that's all. That kind of thing. Some landlords will come back and say, nope, I'm not moving the furniture. We wanted to look at one place and they wouldn't. They had really nice looking furniture in there. And we thought, this is lovely, but we have 3 children.
Yeah, that's not going to work.
And so we said, we'll come look at the place, but is the landlord willing to move the furniture? And the landlord said no. So we didn't even make an offer knowing that. But sometimes you don't know that ahead of time, and the landlord will come back to you and say, I'm not moving the furniture. And then it's a done deal. Like, that's you're not, if you have furniture and you're not willing to change that, then that's often because they're looking for house shares and stuff like that. Some families do end up using the furniture that's
it costs them to store that stuff somewhere else.
Exactly.
Like that,
they've made those purchases and that kind of thing. Obviously there would be things like there are some landlords, not all, that like utilities might be included into the bill or not. So that would be one thing. If you have a pet or not, if you do want to have a pet in the future, having that written in, there's all kinds of different things in the contract, and that kind of stuff. And so it is a lot of really reading through things, because we found out, at least with our second place, like some things were slipped into the contract that we didn't quite understand, which meant wasn't great. What you're responsible for as a renter versus what in the States, when we rented at least, and again, there are junk landlords, like slum landlords, I think is what it sometimes is called, and stuff that do not take care of the renters. That still happens here. But in general, in the States, if something goes wrong with your flat, like, the landlord takes care of that. Here, it depends what's in the contract. So it's weird, because you're renting and you're thinking, oh, the landlord should take care of this thing. But what we found in our second home, this did not happen in our first, and it hasn't happened here, was that the landlord had written in the contract we were responsible for certain things, which then seems ridiculous that we're paying for that when it's not our house. We're renting, and we're paying a lot of money to rent as well in London. So that is something else that was that was surprising to us, and I don't think that we fully understood that little clause in the contract. So there are things like that are very different. So you make those offers, and then your offer, like this happened to us a lot with the estate agents, the offer goes in, it goes off to the landlord, and they are looking at 15 different offers. So we ended up doing this, and sometimes you do this when you buy a house in the States, is we made like a little, what would you call it? Like a family CV, a family resume in many ways, of like, this is what our family's all about. This is, our kids. This is like,
that's how we do life a little bit.
We've owned a house in the States, so we know how to care for a home, like all that kind of stuff. We often have pointed out that our kids are older, so they're not as messy and stuff, which I don't know if that's really true, but
depending on the day.
Exactly. And have tried to be like, we're a lovely family is basically what we're trying to say. Like, you should want us to live in your house, and we'll care for your home. And so you send that information to, we didn't do that the first round, but we realized that was important, at least this round recently, to do that. And then you wait. And then they can come back to you just like they would a house if you're buying a house, and say, actually, the landlord would like these things, or wants you to keep this furniture. Are you willing to keep that? Or wants you to go up by this much per month. Are you willing to do that? Or wants to put in a clause that after a year can raise the rent by whatever percentage, or things like that. So there's a lot of back and forth. And while all that is happening, someone else can come in, because they're still showing the property usually. Often we had that where we looked at properties and they said, there's an offer, but if you did this, the landlord would take yours. Again, I don't always know if that's true or not, but that's all right.
It's just hard. Like that negotiation phase is always difficult. Because again, you feel like you're doing something, you're saying straightforward, this is the things, and then you have to go back and forth, and sometimes that gets really difficult. And And it's just like you're just renting the place. It's not like you're, this long-term commitment at this place or whatever. And so I think that's always kind of a weird thing that we're still a little bit getting used to in some ways. So
definitely. I mean, it's our third time around. So
yeah.
And then once the offer is accepted, there's still other things that have to happen. So like and this would be standard in the States for renting too, generally. They have to check like, what is your income levels? What is your bank account like? Those kind of things.
Yeah.
Some of it has
references
depended. References, things like that, basically to show that you're going to pay your rent on time and you're going to take care of the house and not trash it. So they want to know like people you've rented from in the past, that kind of thing. That is like all, kind of, that feels standard for the States. But I think the biggest difference of renting is the whole offer type of thing. And that's not just in London. That does happen outside of London as well. Like I said, in the States, it's more common in a major city.
Yeah.
But often, like, whatever it's set at as the rent, that's the rent, and you're not going to be putting an offer in under, over, like that kind of thing. And here it feels like you're buying a house.
Yeah, it definitely
but
does.
You're not. Yeah. You're renting. And I think that was the hardest thing for us to grasp. And if you are somebody who is looking to move to the UK, in particular into London as well, it's just something to know going in. It's also something to know that things go quickly. At least right now they are. Obviously in COVID lockdown, they weren't. And you could grab someplace for much cheaper. But in most times, and every other time that we have been here, things go so quickly. And so it's wise, if we had any advice, it is wise to call the estate agents that are in the area that have properties, whether they have something listed or not, and tell them the things, be really nice, and tell them the things that you're looking for, so that if they get a property, sometimes they'll call you before they list it. Sometimes they'll probably still list it, but you might be one of the first people that gets to go see it, and that can give you a bit of an up of seeing it. It is wise to not put an offer in the first property you look at if you've never looked at properties in London before, because try to pack your day, maybe if you have a day or something, to go look at a bunch of stuff, because then you get a feel for what it's like. As Americans coming into the UK, you're going to immediately think there's no storage. What do you mean the laundry's in the kitchen? This is small, this seems old, why is there cracks in the walls? Those kind of things. Maybe on a new build, that's not going to happen. The laundry will still probably be in the kitchen. But it's the fridge is small, the freezer is small, those kinds of things. Those are the things that you have to go see many properties to realize, no, this is just what it's like. Because I think you could write off a really cool place for some of those reasons, realizing that, people buy cupboards, or, that kind of thing. Wouldn't you say? It's kind of taking your expectations that you are not in the States. I mean, if you're moving from New York City, it probably looks very similar. Yeah. But if you're moving from someplace else, that things are just bigger in the States, really.
I mean, I would say too,
and newer.
Probably our situation's a little bit more unique, but I would say a lot of times Americans moving into London probably things are being taken care of by companies and things like that. Not everyone.
Some companies too.
So that's usually helpful as well, because you'll have people that have been on the ground here for a while that can help you with all that kind of stuff. But you're right. I think the idea of renting, make sure you, as hard as it is to not just try to pull the trigger really fast, make sure you kind of take your time and see as many places as you possibly can, especially if it's your first time, just so you understand and see the differences. Because that was super helpful for us. I think initially, because our first house that we were in, we just saw photos, and so we didn't really know what else we could be looking at. We were just trusting certain people that was the way it is, or that's the best you could probably do, or whatever. And so you just don't really know. So I think being able to see as many as you can is always really helpful.
At the beginning, I will say, when you're doing this second time around, if you find a place you like, make an offer.
Well, I think too. I think once you've lived in a space, once you've kind of understood how you live in London and things like that, you could change how much space you need. What do you need in your space? That kind of thing. So I think by now we've kind of understood like how do we do things well as a family, and what type of space we need for that. And I feel like we have a pretty good handle on that, but we definitely didn't know that when we first moved. So when we were looking at places, we were just kind of like, yeah, that looks fine. Okay. You know,
I would
so
say
I think,
too, if you're looking at places and you're not here and you're having to make that decision, which is actually very common, most estate agents now will provide you with a video. Do not trust the photographs. The video is obviously something, and ask them for a video, a current video. Make sure you're clear on that you're
like
not asking for something.
Yeah.
A lot of them will have that now. In COVID, they had to do that. So a lot of them have kept with that kind of thing. Of course, be mindful. Even in the videos, I know this from a photographer's perspective, I can tell when they've used a wide angle lens on something. Look for the edges to not quite be straight. Sometimes they'll crop that part off though too. You know, we got to know the photographer that did the photographs for our first house we lived in here, and he was telling us all those tips and tricks and secret things that people will do. Obviously, they can edit the photos, that kind of thing. A video is harder to do that in.
Yeah, that's why I think it's key to do that.
And so if you have a friend looking, we did this when we were looking for friends that hadn't moved here yet. I videoed everything, like here's how the cupboards open, here's this, that kind of stuff. I'm sure I annoyed the estate agents. But a lot of people are doing that already. If you don't even have someone to look for, you can ask the estate agent, hey, we're really interested in this property. Could you take a quick video to walk us through the house? And that can help you if you're having to make a decision where you're not physically here yet, which I know is really common because frankly, it's just expensive for flights and stuff like that.
That's true.
And that kind of thing, and especially if you're on a short time span and that and you need the house. That's the other thing to know is like sometimes in the States you can pick a house to rent and it can be a little bit further in advance. Here sometimes it's 3 weeks before that you're looking at houses because of the time span of when houses come up, and then you're moving in 3 weeks. So that's challenging as well. I will say too, in the States, every time we moved houses, we did it on our own. We rented a U-Haul and we moved our house on our own. Not once did we hire people to move. I cannot imagine doing that on our own now here. Maybe if we were moving to the suburbs or something, but if you are
still,
new,
I don't know if I do that.
Yeah, if you are new in London, please keep in mind the streets are very small. The spaces you're going to be taking your furniture in and out of or moving things into are very small. We have, how many flights of stairs do we have to get up to this level we're at? Lots of stairs. To even move the sofa or kitchen table or anything. It's expensive. I'm not going to lie. It's not cheap, but it's worth hiring movers because it's just more challenging. And just as it would be in a city as well, like New York City or something like that, the same thing goes for here. So that is something we would definitely recommend.
Definitely recommend.
If you're moving here from the United States and you're having things shipped here, keep in mind that the spaces are smaller. So like if you are shipping a king size bed from the United States, it may not even fit in the room that you're thinking, or will take up the whole space.
It probably won't fit.
You'd have to have a very large room for that to fit.
Sizes are different here.
Yeah, like I would have loved to bring dressers and stuff like that for ours, but we would have had no place to put them. Some places have cupboards built in, some don't, that kind of thing. So I know there may be things like we could have maybe brought our kitchen table and that would have been fine. But just remembering that spaces are smaller and thinking through that. The good thing is if you are renting a place, you can get a floor plan and you can see if your things will fit in those spaces before you would ship them here. Sometimes you don't have that option before or you haven't selected a place yet. So,
but that is a good point. Like if you are shipping things, most of your stuff is going to be way too big.
The majority just will be. And sometimes it won't even fit through doors and things like that too because it's too big. So that's something to keep in mind. So that is the differences between renting in the UK, mainly the like getting to the house to rent it.
In the US.
And I think too, something to know of like renting in the UK once you're in a space is there are certain things that are like you're going to most likely have mold someplace because that is what it's like now. Most good landlords...
That's its own podcast in itself.
It is. Most landlords will like take care of stuff if there's a leak and stuff like that. They should take care of it. They're required to take care of it. However, like it's very common because it's just so damp here to like get a little bit of mold that shows up on the edge of the windows. If that happened in the United States, people would be like, well, it does happen in the United States. I know it does. But you're like, wait, what? And so there are just things you
mold is
you have to lower your standards maybe because you're thinking I'm living in this place that I'm spending all this money in and staying because it's expensive to live in London. It should be at this standard, and you just have to lower that.
I mean, I don't think you need to lower it. I think there's just certain things that you need to understand. That's just how life is.
There's nothing to prevent some of those things.
Yeah. I mean,
The
you're gonna have mold in your house. You're just going to.
You might have mice. Hopefully, you don't have rats.
There's just certain things about living in a city that are just part of it. Like that's just how it is. So it's not lowering your standard. It's just that those are just things that you have to deal with. Like if you were living out in the middle of the country, there are certain things about living out in the country that you have to deal with. Like that's just how it is. So
So do let us know, since you guys seem to love this topic of UK versus US living and that kind of thing and those things. Do let us know what else you would like to know about us living in the UK, or what we found good, difficult, all of that. Hopefully, if you know somebody moving to the UK, that this is a helpful podcast to share with them, to give them some tips and stuff. Always feel free to reach out to us with other questions. But these are some things that I wish both of us would have known a little bit more about, but we have learned now living in our third property of what is normal, expectations to have, that kind of stuff. And hopefully it's helpful to one of you, or you just find it fascinating to hear about this stuff. We will talk to you next time, and thanks so much for listening.
See ya.